Hi, students. Welcome to what is essentially going to be your class for this week, for week 3. The topic for this week is disorders of the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. And specifically, what we are going to focus on together are heart failure signs and symptoms. The reason I wanted to do this together for your class for this week is because this is something that just has a lot of little intricacies and nuance, and I just wanted to make sure we got some practice with it for our class for this week. Before we get to that, though, just a couple quick announcements. First, it is week 3, which means next week is the midterm. Wild, I know. So our midterm, as a reminder, is next Tuesday, which is the 18th. It will be in person. If you have a conflict, that means that you can't take the midterm at that time. Please reach out to me now and let me know. You do need to let us know in advance in order to get accommodations to take the midterm at another time. The midterm covers modules 1 through 3. It will be 75 multiple choice questions. Some of those will be select all that apply. It's closed notes, no internet, nothing like that. Just use your brain. To study, please use the resources I have curated for you in the Helpful Links for Patho website. The most important thing as you're studying, study frequently and often, of course, but also study different things. So don't do just one thing, especially don't just do Quizlet. Quizlet is just vocab. The midterm is a lot of application of concepts. So if you were just memorizing vocab, you were going to set yourself up to not do well on the midterm. So you need to also be practicing essentially using signs and symptoms to diagnose diseases. So that is more than just vocabulary. To do that, please take advantage of those resources in there. Like I said, for example, like the flashcards that I gave out in class last week. If you were not here last week, you can find a PDF version of those flashcards in that website. If you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. Okay, so let's get to class for this week. We will not have an in-person class altogether this week because Tuesday, the 11th, is Veterans Day and campus is closed on Tuesday. So we will not have an in-person class. This is counting as our class for week 3. So to be marked as present for this week, you need to complete this worksheet, all 4 pages of it that I handed out in class last week. If you were not here last week and you didn't get this, there's a PDF of this in the assignment in Canvas. So you can just print it off or put it on your iPad or whatever and fill it out. Please just fill this whole thing out and then upload that to Canvas. That would be due by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, the 12th, in order to be counted as present for this week. So once again, any questions, reach out, let me know. So let's get into it. So I'm going to switch my camera to a document camera so we can do this worksheet together. Just a heads up, before we do this, if you haven't watched the video lecture yet, please do watch that, because as we're going through this, I'm going to assume that you've already kind of watched the meat of the video lecture about heart failure. At the very least, you should watch from 12 minutes to about 43 minutes. That is the heart failure part of the lecture. You might be looking at that and being like, wow, that's a lot of the lecture. Yes, it is. And that's because heart failure, the signs and symptoms of heart failure are a little complicated. There are a lot of them, and some of them feel almost random, like you might not immediately see why they're connected to the heart. So that is what this activity is really about, is understanding why those signs and symptoms happen. One, that is pathophysiology at its core, is understanding what goes wrong in the body and how that causes signs and symptoms. But 2, that's going to help you memorize all of those signs and symptoms and really understand where they come from, as opposed to just taking a list of 50 things and trying to like shove into your brain what type of heart failure it's related to. So all that to say, please watch that part of the video lecture before you do this worksheet. If you haven't watched it yet, go watch it and then come back to this. Okay, but for that, I'm actually going to switch my camera here to my document camera. So give me a second to get that all set up there. Okay, it's kind of dark, but hopefully you can see that. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and work on this. Sorry. Can I make that less dark? It's so dark. That's a little better. All right, so this is the first page of this worksheet. And before we get to heart failure, we're just going to do a quick review of blood flow through the circulation. So this was in the slides, but I just kind of wanted to go through it together because this is super important for understanding the different signs and symptoms of heart failure. So first, blood enters the right side of the heart. And this is in blue because this is deoxygenated blood, deoxygenated, meaning it has delivered its oxygen, right? And so this deoxygenated blood goes from the right side of the heart, and the right side of the heart pumps the deoxygenated blood into the lungs. And at that point, the blood becomes oxygenated. That's why these arrows are in red. Just to note here, I've written lungs here, but technically, if we want to be a little bit more medical and more precise with our terminology, instead of the lungs, we could say the pulmonary circulation. So pulmonary just means lungs, and then circulation meaning the blood is going through the blood vessels that are in the lungs. So obviously, because that's always where blood should be, but it's the pulmonary circulation. So the part of your circulatory system that is in the lungs, and then that blood becomes oxygenated. Where does the blood go next? It then goes to the left side of the heart, and then the left side of the heart pumps that oxygenated blood into the body. So here, the body means everything that is essentially not the heart, or actually, no, it is the heart, but everything that is not the lungs. So this would include the coronary circulation. So that would be the heart, because the heart needs its own supply of blood. And this would also include the peripheral. Peripheral just meaning everything else, essentially. So this would be, for example, like the kidneys, the brain, the liver, etc. This is all of the other organs in your body. And then, the blood delivers oxygen, becomes deoxygenated, and we keep going around. So this very simple flow of blood through the body, you really need to understand this in order to understand the signs and symptoms of heart failure. So once again, we go from the right side of the heart to the lungs, from the lungs to the left side of the heart, from the left side of the heart to the body, and then back to the right side. So this flow. Okay, so now that we have that little cheat sheet, let's go ahead and move on to the next part of the worksheet down here. See if you guys can see that okay. Yeah. Okay, so what is heart failure? So to think about this, we want to think, what is the normal function of the heart? So I'm just going to write this over here. So the normal function of the heart is to deliver blood, right, to the body. So in heart failure, what do you think is happening? Well, it turns out if that's the normal function of the heart, well, in heart failure, the heart is failing. So it is not doing its normal function. So heart failure is essentially the heart fails, meaning the heart is unable to meet the demands of the body. So the heart is unable to pump enough blood. Yeah, we'll just say enough. To meet the demands of the body. In other words, the heart is failing to do its normal job. Okay. So that is heart failure. There are many different types of heart failure. You guys only need to know the difference between right and left heart failure, which is helpful because we can think about right and left heart failure and their signs and symptoms in two big categories. So we can think about these signs and symptoms of heart failure in terms of forwards effects and backwards effects. So once again, both of these are sort of explaining what causes the signs and symptoms of heart failure. I'm going to write HF for heart failure. Okay, so what are the forward effects of heart failure? So anytime the heart fails, sorry, let me take a step back. So let's go back and look at our little diagram here. So we have two sides of the heart. In heart failure, either one of them can stop working. So let's imagine the right side of the heart stops working. Well, normally the right side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs. If the right side of the heart stops working, it's not going to be able to pump blood to the lungs. So we're going to see essentially a lack of blood delivery to the lungs. So the lungs are forward from the right side of the heart, meaning they are following that arrow. So we would call that effect, in this case, the right side of the heart not pumping enough blood to the lungs, we would call that a forward effect of heart failure. So the more specific way we could say that is forward effects. These are caused by decreased perfusion, meaning not enough blood. So decreased perfusion, meaning not enough blood to target organs. So if we're talking about the right side of the heart again, the right side of the heart normally pumps blood to the lungs. So if the right side of the heart has failed, it's not going to be able to pump blood to the lungs. So we're going to see forward effects of right heart failure that are going to manifest as decreased perfusion of the lungs, meaning the lungs would not be getting enough blood. So in general, those are forward effects. You do need to know that for the midterm, that in general, forward effects are due to decreased perfusion. Okay. What about backwards effects? What the heck does that mean, right? So let's go ahead and look back at our flow of blood through the circulation again. So if the right side of the heart fails, just to use an example, I think it's understandable that if this right side of the heart isn't working, it's not going to be able to pump enough blood to the lungs, right? That's forward effects. But it's not like your body has less blood. There's still the same amount of blood in your body. So if the right side of the heart isn't able to pump that blood into the lungs, well, it's almost like the blood's going to kind of get stuck in the previous step. So the analogy I used in the video is sort of like a beaver dam. So if we kind of make it so that there's just a little trickle of blood making it to the lungs, then all of that other blood is going to almost be like a river that has put a beaver dam in it. So it's going to get all this blood pooling in the previous step. And that would be considered a backwards effect. So essentially, whatever is backwards, meaning going the opposite direction of the normal flow of blood, that wherever that place is, that is where we are going to see the backwards effects of heart failure. So we're going to write for this, the more specific way to say that is what are backwards effects of heart failure? These are all caused by increased blood pooling. So this in this case would be like in the body. And that increased blood pooling causes increased hydrostatic pressure, which means essentially it's like the fluid is getting pushed out of the blood and into the tissues. And that increased hydrostatic pressure is going to cause edema, which is another way to say swelling. That's the big important word there. So I'm just gonna, I don't have a highlighter. That'd be great. So these are the big important terms to remember. When we see backwards effects, we want to think edema. And when you see forward effects, you want to think decreased perfusion. So those two factoids, so forwards effects, decreased perfusion, backwards effects, edema, that plus the flow of blood through the body, those two things together, and you should be able to figure out all of the signs and symptoms that are related to heart failure just from those two facts. Okay, so let me show you how to do that. So we're going to go to the next page here. So once again, this is just showing that little diagram. I filled it out here. And then remember, I'm going to write this up here just so we don't forget. Sorry, just over. Forward effects. Those cause decreased perfusion, meaning not enough blood in the tissue. And backwards effects. Those cause edema, which is swelling. Okay, so now knowing these facts, let's think about the specific signs and symptoms of left heart failure that are due to forward effects and backward effects. Okay, need a better pen. I need more pen. Never have too many pens. My colors are so boring. here we have left heart failure, right? So here I've put in a little X on the left side of the heart to mean that the left side of the heart is unable to pump blood sufficiently. So if that happens, see, we just have this little tiny trickle of blood that's coming out. So not enough blood is being delivered to the body, to the systemic circulation, so the body. Once again, the body includes all of those other organs. So the organs that are going to be especially important here are the ones that need a lot of blood to work the way that they need to work. So this is going to be the brain, and the kidneys are going to be especially affected. But of course, any organ in the body is going to be affected when it can't get enough blood. So forward effects, once again, forward effects, these are all due to decreased perfusion, meaning not getting enough blood. So here, what is forward from the left side of the heart? The body is. So all of these forward effects of left heart failure are going to be due to decreased perfusion, meaning not enough blood, to, I'm going to just say organs throughout the body. So once again, especially important organs here are the brain and the kidneys. So some specific signs and symptoms, we have some brain related signs and symptoms. So this could look like things like confusion, like disorientation, anxiety. So essentially the brain is just not working as well as it needs to. So we're going to see some brain related signs and symptoms potentially. We also could have some kidney related signs and symptoms. And this helps if you remember that the kidney's normal function is to make urine, or I should say, to remove waste from the blood and then make that waste into urine. So if our kidneys are not getting enough blood, that means we are going to end up with decreased urinary output. So decreased urine. So these are two examples, once again, of forward effects of heart failure. Okay, so now let's think about the backward effects. Once again, remember the backward effects are always due to edema or swelling. So we're going to say edema, just swelling, like swelling in fluid, say fluid. Okay, but okay, where is that going to happen? Well, let's look at the left side of the heart. What is backwards from the left side of the heart? In other words, if the left side of the heart is not pumping well, and we just have this little trickle of blood barely making it into the body, where does that blood get stuck, essentially? Well, it's going to get stuck in the stuff that is backwards, meaning going the other direction from the arrow or the other direction of the circulation. So it's going to get stuck in the lungs. So backward effects of left heart failure are all due to edema in the lungs, or the specific vocab term we can use for that is pulmonary edema, meaning like fluid in your lungs. This is fluid in the lungs. Once again, backward effects. A little memorization tip that I have to help you remember this is you can remember left equals lungs. If you have left heart failure, you are going to see backward effects in the lungs. Just a way to help you remember that. Okay, so what are some specific signs and symptoms of backward effects of left heart failure? So these are essentially all specific signs and symptoms of pulmonary edema. So all specific signs and symptoms of fluid in the lungs. Once again, this is fluid in the lungs. So we have some specific examples here. We have, let's start with dyspnea, which is trouble breathing. We have orthopnea, which is the same thing, trouble breathing when lying down, like lying down on your back. We have a very special type of sort of dyspnea and orthopnea, which is called paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. So this is trouble breathing that actually makes you wake up. So trouble breathing that I'm going to say disrupts sleep. And then some other things, you might have like cough because you have fluid in the lungs. The lungs are going to try to cough up that fluid. And then the other thing is if you listen to the person's lungs, you're going to hear crackles when you're listening to those on auscultation. That's what it's called when you listen to something with a stethoscope. Auscultation. Oh my gosh, this is really testing my spelling skills. All of these are all things related to fluid in lungs. So think about if you have had a really bad cold ever and you have like a lot of gunk and stuff in your lungs, it feels like you have trouble breathing, right? It's harder to breathe. You have a cough. If someone listened to your lungs, sometimes you can even like feel those crackles in your lungs. So it's going to feel like that. And then in addition, because people with left heart failure tend to have a lot of fluid in their lungs, you also have specifically trouble breathing when lying down because some of that fluid essentially like spreads out more when you lie down, and it sort of makes the difficulty breathing worse. And then it can be so bad that it actually makes someone wake up. So some of these, especially, we're going to say this one, the paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, which is PND for short, this should automatically make you think left heart failure. That is like it's not 100% always related to left heart failure, but on the midterm, if you see paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, this is the only disease or disorder that we learn about that causes PND. So if you see PND on the midterm, you should think left heart failure. Once again, we can get there because we can remember this has something to do with fluid in the lungs. In other words, pulmonary edema, swelling in the lungs. Edema is always a backwards effect, and the lungs are backwards from the left side of the heart. Okay, so that is the signs and symptoms of left heart failure. Now let's move on to the signs and symptoms of right heart failure. Okay, so once again, we're still going to remember forward effects, decreased perfusion, backwards effects, edema. So now here, now we're talking about right heart failure. The right side of the heart has stopped working. So now we see there's just this little tiny baby trickle of blood is just barely getting to the lungs, right? So that means that these are going to be the forward effects, right? Because look at this little tiny baby trickle. This is forward. So our forward effects of right heart failure are going to be decreased perfusion, meaning not enough blood, of the lungs. Well, what do the lungs normally do? They help oxygenate the blood. So in other words, all of our specific signs and symptoms here are going to be due to decreased oxygenation of the blood, which is specifically called hypoxemia. So hypo, low, oxygen, emia in the blood. Different than hypoxia, which is low oxygen in the tissues and sort of throughout the body. Hypoxemia is specifically low oxygen in the blood. And this is often due to issues with blood circulating through the lungs. So some specific things we can see due to this hypoxemia would be, or in addition to hypoxemia, we might see cyanosis, which is sort of like blue fingers or lips, sort of like a blue tinge. That's really going to be the most important one there. There's some cyanosis, some blue fingers and lips. Okay, so that is forward effects of right heart failure. Now let's think about those backward effects. Once again, the right side of the heart in this example has stopped working or is not working as well. So we're just getting this little trickle of blood going to the lungs. But all that blood has to go somewhere. And if it's not going to the lungs, it is going to essentially pile up in the previous step. So what is previous? What is backwards from the right side of the heart? That is the body. So when I say backwards, meaning the opposite direction of the circulation. So backwards is the body. So the backward effects of right heart failure are all going to be due to edema in the body, so like in different organs. Or in other words, we could call this peripheral edema. Once again, edema, remember, means swelling. So what are some specific examples of this peripheral edema that we can see? There's a lot of examples here, but an important one to know is pitting. edema. So this is edema in the legs, so swelling in the legs. And it's called pitting because you can literally like push on the swollen tissue and it'll make a little dent because you essentially like push some of the fluid back into the circulation. So pitting edema. Another common one is ascites. So this is fluid in the essentially in the abdomen. And then you can also have enlargement of some specific organs. So enlargement like swelling of some organs. For example, you can have swelling of the liver, which is hepatomegaly. So this is enlarged liver. You can also have splenomegaly. This is an enlarged spleen. And then another specific sign that you can see with right heart failure, another backwards effect, is not necessarily swelling in a specific organ, but just thinking about, because you have this blood just kind of pooling all throughout the body, you can actually see sort of like the distension or the like fullness of the veins in places where the veins are close to the skin. So where am I going to write this? Write this over here. So one other very or more specific to right heart failure symptom you might see is jugular vein distension, which just means sort of like a swollen, enlarged neck vein. And once again, that's because all that blood has nowhere to go, so it's kind of backing up and pooling throughout the body. So you can literally see all that blood getting, just like filling up the veins and making them look very swollen and enlarged. So you see that with a large vein in the neck, the jugular vein. That's the one that you can sort of press on in your neck. Okay, so these are our signs and symptoms of right heart failure. So once again, we look at the right side of the heart. What is forward from the right side of the heart? The lungs. So forward effects of right heart failure are due to decreased perfusion of the lungs. What is backwards, meaning going against the normal circulation from the right side? That is the body. So backward effects of right heart failure are edema in the organs throughout the body. In other words, things like pitting edema, ascites, etc. Okay, so that is the secret to understanding all of the signs and symptoms of heart failure. So what you guys are going to do now is essentially use this little cheat sheet to help you understand some of these signs and symptoms. And we are going to do this. We're going to do 2 of these practice questions together, and then I'm going to have you do the rest of them on your own. So our first one here, jugular vein distension. Remember, the jugular vein is the vein in your neck, and distension just means it's sort of swollen and big. So this is a enlarged, swollen neck vein. Okay, so enlarged, swollen, is that decreased perfusion or is that edema? That's edema, right? Because we're talking about swelling. We're not talking about an organ not getting enough blood. In this case, the neck has like too much blood, so it's edema. Okay, so edema, is that a forward effect or a backwards effect? We go back and look at our first page here of notes, right? We said backward effects of heart failure are caused by edema. So if you see backwards effects, you should think, if you see edema, you should think backwards effects. So this is backwards. Okay, so what part of the body is affected here? So when we think back to our flow of blood through the body, we have 2 options, really. We have the lungs or the body. So the jugular vein, is the jugular vein part of the lungs or is it part of the body? Well, it's not in the lungs, right? It's in your neck. So it would be part of the body. So in other words, it is part of the systemic circulation. I'm just going to write body. Okay. So now thinking about that, let's think about our flow of blood through the body here. So I'm actually just going to rewrite that up here. So we have from the right side of the heart, remember that goes to the lungs, from the lungs to the left side of the heart, and then from there to the body and back to the right side. So in this case, we are thinking about edema in the body. And we have a backwards effect, meaning that blood is pooling in the body. So the body is backwards from what side of the heart? Well, it's forwards from the left side, right? Because that's the normal way the blood pumps. But it's backwards from the right side of the heart. The body is backwards from right side of the heart. That's a right, an R, and a heart. Okay, so now knowing that, we can go ahead and complete this sentence. I'm going to say jugular vein is backwards from the right side of the heart. And remember, I said backwards here because this is edema. That's how we knew it should be backwards. So jugular vein distension is a sign of right heart failure because the blood pooling we're seeing, the edema, is backwards from the right side of the heart, meaning the blood is pooling and getting stuck in the body, and that is why we were seeing that jugular vein distension. That's how you can kind of logic your way through all of these signs and symptoms and see how they make sense in terms of the different types of heart, or in terms of right versus left heart failure. Okay, let's do one more. We're gonna do that one. I want to pick a hard one. Yeah, let's do number 3. Number 3 is proximal nocturnal dyspnea. So once again, what is this? This is difficulty breathing while sleeping. Okay. And why does that happen? It happens because of fluid in the lungs. So fluid in the lungs is that decreased perfusion or edema. That is edema, that is swelling. Okay, so edema, is that a forward or a backwards effect? Edema is always a backward effect. Okay, so what part of the body is affected? I'm going to just draw my little circulation diagram again. So right heart goes to the lungs, which goes to the left heart, which goes to the body, and then back to the right heart. Once again, we have figured out our what part is being affected here. Obviously, the lungs, in other words, the pulmonary circulation. So I'm going to just circle the lungs here. Okay, and we have, once again, a backwards effect because this is due to swelling, it's due to edema. So the question here is the lungs, we're thinking about, are they backward from which side of the heart? Well, look at the arrows. The right side pumps blood to the lungs. So the lungs are forward from the right side. So it's not the right side. Instead, the lungs are backward. This is backwards, right? So the lungs are backwards from the left side of the heart. Okay, so knowing that, now we can go ahead and complete this sentence. The lungs are backwards, and once again, how do we know it's backwards? It's because we're talking about something that has to do with edema. Proximal nocturnal dyspnea is fluid in the lungs. That's edema. So the lungs are backwards from the left side of the heart. So proximal nocturnal dyspnea is a sign of left heart failure. See how we did that? Okay. So now that we just did questions 1 and 3, I'm going to have you do questions 2, 4, and 5 on your own. And then once you're done, you're just going to upload this completed worksheet to Canvas, and that will count as your attendance for this week. And if you have any questions, please just reach out and let me know. Bye, guys. See you next week.